Is art and culture really important for civil service exam preparation? I would say more for your mains than for your prelims. It's because in prelims, three questions are asked from art and culture, and out of three, even all India rank one would probably know the answer for two questions. And most aspirants who would clear prelims properly would not be able to get more than one question right. So if that's the case, it makes zero sense to read Nitin Singania cover to cover. It's of no use. And anyway, Nitin Singania is a book that's not going to be of any use in your mains examination. And to understand why I say so, you need to have a look at previous year's questions asked from art and culture in your mains exam. It's only when you get to understand the pattern, it's when you get to understand the demand of the questions, you'll be able to understand that factual competency, just having 10 or 12 or 15 points on each different art form, is of zero consequence in your mains exam, at least as evident from the pattern in the last 2 years, right? And so that's why you need to really have a plan for art and culture. In fact, you don't need to have a plan for art and culture for prelims. You can even simply read your NCERTs on ancient and medieval India, assume that you have sufficient knowledge on art and culture, go to your exam, you'll be able to get at least 30% of the questions in art and culture right. Maybe reading Nitin Singania and by hearting all the pages of Nitin Singania, it's going to fetch you another one more question right. So I would simply say, just forget it. Instead, use the same time that you would probably use to read Nitin Singania. Spend the same time reading and revising and becoming great with Lakshmikant. I think the payoff will be much better, right? So, what is it that makes the art and culture questions in mains important? The reason is because out of 6 or 7 questions asked in history every year, definitely 3 questions are asked from art and culture. And then there are years like 2020 mains when there were 4 questions asked from art and culture, right? So 50% of your history questions asked in general studies paper 1 are simply from art and culture. And most students, even those who make it through mains, the only area that they find it difficult in history is from art and culture. It's because the other part, usually asked from modern India, it's something from recent memory, right? You would have studied and revised spectrum umpteen number of times for your prelims purpose. So there is no way that you would be totally feeling unfamiliar with respect to a particular question from modern India. But when it comes to art and culture, there is a very high probability that you may not even know how to begin a particular question. And I'll show you the question of previous years where you will really not feel very confident to take an answer beyond half a page or 1 page of content, right? And most of the difficult questions from art and culture actually turn out to also be 15-mark questions, which means you have to write for 2.5 pages. At least if it's a 10-mark question, you can manage something with an introduction, something with conclusion that itself fills in half a page, and then half page of content. You'll be able to decently manage if it's a 10-mark question. But if it's a 15-mark question, your answer stands very, very insufficient when you try to manage some kind of an answer instead of writing the perfect answer, right? But can perfect answers be written? Yes, it can definitely be written when it comes to art and culture if you know the method of preparation. That only requires you to sit and analyze what kind of a preparation strategy is to be followed. And if you ask me, sir, is it all worth doing it? I would say yes, it is definitely worth doing it. It's because if 3 questions are asked from art and culture, 2 questions are easy to moderate. I'm sure anybody who clears prelims, they will be able to manage the 2 questions. That one question should not be seen as just one other question. It should also be seen as that one question where you have a potential of impressing the examiner beyond your peers, right? When 80% of those who are writing mains cannot give a good decent answer for that one difficult question, and if you happen to be the aspirant who can give a very decent answer for that one question, that handling of that one difficult art and culture question will definitely have its ripple spillover effects on other history questions as well. So the same examiner who's going to look at your art and culture question, if he feels impressed, he feels that, oh, only this aspirant has given me a very satisfactory answer for this particular question. If he gets that kind of an impression from your answer, that's definitely going to add on to another half of mark in every other history question as well, right? So you should not simply look at it as if its value is limited to one additional question, but instead it's also the impact that it's going to have on all other history 6 or 7 questions as well. So if you can manage this question much better than your peers, I'm sure you're going to get at least 2 or 3 mark edge in this particular question. And in addition, this good impression will add to another half of mark better in all other history questions as well. So this itself is like around 6 to 8 marks, right? And this kind of an attitude where you don't leave anything to chance, where you have a meticulous planned method to tackle every kind of question from every different subject, that itself will add at least another 30-40 marks to your main score, right? So do not neglect this particular one question, assuming that it's one question. It's about that one temperament that you're going to train, you're going to create for yourself when it comes to sitting and making a plan to tackle these kind of questions. So let's try to figure out what these questions are, and why do I say that one difficult question you need to have a plan, and why do I even say that? Let's have a look at all of that. So as you can see on the screen, we have certain questions which I would label them as easy questions, because these are questions which do not really require any extra reading, right? I'm sure every aspirant who has cleared prelims will have some idea about Bhakti literature, and they'll be able to manage the fourth question. You would have definitely studied about temple architecture, and you would have studied about the social utility of temples, how temples act as gathering spots. The people of the community, they gather in temples, and when rituals are performed in temples, each different caste group has a certain ritual position in that particular affair, right? So it actually reinforces this particular caste system. It reinforces a certain type of hierarchy in a local village community, right? So these are simple points. And the first question, let's say it was a very general question. It was asked in 2023, explain the role of geographical factors towards development of ancient India. It's more like a geography question, I would say, rather than saying it's a history question. Okay, so these are pretty simple questions, and I don't want to spend too much time explaining how to write an answer for all these questions, and just simply reading your NCERTs gives you an answer to tackle these kind of questions. So instead, let me focus the time on throwing some light on how do you tackle the difficult questions, and these are the questions that you can see on the screen here. So every year, at least one question fits into this category, and these are 15-mark questions. So look at the nature of questions. Though I have given headings like technology, motives and iconography, link between philosophy and architecture, I would say that these are all questions which follows a very integrative approach towards art and culture. Because commonly, the method of how you look at art and culture is paintings as a separate entity, literature as a separate entity, then religion as a separate entity, architecture as completely different watertight compartment, right? So this is how students pick up a very incorrect outlook towards art and culture. Whereas in my opinion, art and culture should be studied in the right historical context. It should not be segregated out of a historical context. It should be studied only in that particular time period in which that particular development actually happens, right? So it is that kind of an outlook which will help you tackle these kind of questions. I'll simply, for the sake of giving an example, let me take the first question asked last year in mains. Look at the question. What were the major technological changes introduced during Sultanate period? How did these changes influence the Indian society, right? So what's so difficult and challenging about this question? It's because most of us, if you'd have read Satish Chandra NCERT, you will know some basic technologies which are mentioned in Satish Chandra level, right? You would have read about this Persian wheel, which could have found its way into India, right? Babur, when he entered into India in Lahore, he was able to make an observation that he was able to see the gearing mechanism employed in Persian wheel, right? So this gearing mechanism is a very important innovation, a scientific, a technological inflow that happened during this particular period, right? Because the records of the previous period, in the Hindu period, when the Muslim invasions have not actually happened, when we look at the records, we don't find mention of this gearing mechanism which allows a wheel to be driven by ox, right? But it's only when you're able to have this gearing which can change the axis of rotation, then an ox that rotates around the Persian wheel will be able to make the rotation of the Persian wheel so as to fetch water and irrigate the fields. So this inflow of scientific technology of gearing mechanism, it simply had a lot of spillover effect into different sectors. It was not only with respect to irrigation, the same gearing mechanism can be now used for cotton ginning as well, right? So, and sugarcane mills as well. So if you see, its spillover effects was on different sectors, and that is exactly what the question demands. Okay, so you cannot, so when you read NCERT Satish Chandra, and as a general studies aspirant, you would not really transcend beyond the reading of NCERTs of Satish Chandra, right? And if that is the case, you have hardly one or two ideas with which you will not be able to stretch an answer, you will not be able to fill the content for 2.5 pages. And that's why I have labeled this particular type of question as a difficult to brainstorm and challenging to fill pages type of a question. Okay, so it's not that students will feel unfamiliar totally when it comes to art and culture questions, because everybody knows something about art and culture, but taking it forward, filling the entire pages is the biggest challenge, right? So this is just one aspect of this particular question. And then it was during the time of Delhi Sultanate, you will have the distillation process, right? The distillation process which will actually seep in from the Arab lands into India, because we have historical evidences which points out to distillation of liquor which will be carried out in India. And how did this distillation technology get in? It's because the Arabs borrowed it from the Europeans, and from the Arabs it slowly found its way into India. And it is this distillation which was not only useful for liquor manufacture, it was also useful for purification of zinc mineral. You will find Rajasthan mines will be operated during this period. It's because now that you have distillation process, you'll be able to distill zinc. Zinc has a low boiling point, so you'll be able to make it into vapors, then condense it, and you find zinc deposits. So the impurities are segregated. So you find better zinc equipments, tools which are manufactured during this particular period, right? So this is how the answer has to be approached in various different levels. Okay, and to have an idea about this, how do you anticipate these kind of questions, and how do you ensure that your preparation is fail proof, right? You should not end up writing simply another average answer just like most aspirants would write. You cannot say that I was able to somehow manage an answer for this particular question. Then that's not a very sharp and a smart way of planning and preparing for this exam, right? You're leaving things to chance. So that's why to tackle these kind of questions, which are from those peripheral areas which often are neglected by aspirants, because aspirants in their mind, it's all about painting and all different forms of painting, what colors are used, what pigments are used, what is depicted in the paintings. This is how they get into the depths. And such kind of questions are not even asked in your mains examination. And that is actually the content that you will find given in pages and pages in Nitin Singania textbook. And that's why at the very outset of this video, I had made a remark that Nitin Singania is useless for this examination. And I'm sure most of the aspirants who are watching this video will also not be completing the Nitin Singania even in their 4th or 5th attempt, because it's simply impossible. Anybody can start Nitin Singania. Unlike Lakshmikant, where most aspirants would read cover to cover, Nitin Singania actually has so much of facts which really do not add anything of significance to the scores that you might actually get in your mains. It may add to your knowledge base, but the knowledge base is not going to be very useful, because look at the questions. The questions are all linked to different aspects. It's not about define stupas and define all the different architectural styles of stupas. What are the different features of stupas? If that's a kind of a question asked in mains, yes, Nitin Singania can be useful. But if you look at the previous year's questions, all the difficult questions, it's not simply about one particular issue, but it's about the historical interactions between the question in hand and the particular context that we find, right? So for example, look at this 5th question here. In the difficult type of questions, you have the 5th question. How do you justify the view that the level of excellence of Gupta numismatic art is not at all noticeable in later times? So it's nothing to do with coinage alone. You cannot simply write about Gupta coins, Samudragupta coins, what is Chandragupta coins, right? Females are depicted in Gupta coins. That's not the entirety of this answer. The question is something else. The question is not about write about Gupta coins. If that is the case, Nitin Singania can be helpful. But the question here is about the excellence that you find in Gupta numismatics in coins. What is the historical factors that prevents its replication in the later era coins, right? It's less to do about coinage. It's more to do about the ecosystem where a central authority weakens, and when central authority weakens, automatically law and order issues come up, and when law and order issues come up, trade and commerce becomes restricted, and when trade and commerce becomes restricted, people have no need for carrying high denomination coins. So there was no need for gold coins in the first place, and we have to write some supporting evidences that even Huan Zhang a Chinese traveler who had visited India during the 7th century, he found himself robbed on the roads. So that shows the pitiful conditions of security and law and order prevailing during this time. So all these corroborate to the fact that there was no high value transactions happening there because of disintegration of political authority. So most transactions were low value. That's why even cowrie shells, those seashells, those were used basically for exchange and commerce, right? And when so there was no need for such high value transactions, so that is why gold coins were not minted in great quantities, right? So this is how the answer has to be written. So as you can see, it's more about the historical context, and it's very less to do about the coinage technology as such, right? All these difficult questions, it could be about different themes, but it's the answer for these questions can only be written properly if a very good grasp of the historical conditions during which this particular phenomenon would have happened, if that's very much clearly known to the aspirant, only then a decent answer can be written, right? So now I hope I have brought to your attention about the difference between the easy questions and the difficult questions. Easy questions are pretty straightforward, right? You look at the easy questions, same kind of Gupta Empire, but look at the easy question, look at the third question on the screen. You will find discuss the contributions of Gupta period and Chola period to Indian heritage and culture. So there you can write about all the Gupta coins. You can write about all the literary works that developed during the time of Guptas. And with respect to Chola, you can write about all the temple building activities. You can talk about the Nataraja idols and sculpture activities that took place during Cholas. So it's a very simple question. Anybody who has read NCERTs will have something to write. But it's only the latter type of questions, the difficult type of questions, where aspirants really will have a tough time to take their answer beyond the first page. And this is what actually happened even in the case of aspirants who were able to clear mains last year, right? So, but there is, again, I would repeat, there is a method by means of which you can actually prime yourself to even face the difficult type of questions with a lot of satisfaction and give your best even for such kind of questions. And let's see what that method is. First is, you have to understand that the art and culture questions of the difficult nature, they don't really repeat, right? One question was on Delhi Sultanate's technological development. So that was not something that had ever been asked in any of the previous mains. And similarly, there was never a question asked which compared the quality of Guptan coinage with the post-Guptan period. So that was never a type of question asked, right? So understand that blindly preparing answers for previous year's questions are not going to be of any use. You need to go beyond the previous year's questions. So one way of how you can go beyond the previous year's questions of mains is to at least try to have a glance at the art and culture questions asked in history optional papers, because history is such a static subject, right? So there are only some X or Y different variations of questions that can be asked with respect to history. Unlike polity, because there's so much of current events that keeps on happening. So though the underlying concept could be something about right to freedom of speech and expression, but the recent case laws might have given a totally new interpretation to how Supreme Court views that particular right. So there is always something of change that happens when it comes to polity questions. But when it comes to history, it's simply cast in stone, right? So there are just certain permutations of questions which can actually be asked. So that's why one smart way of trying to anticipate future directions to think and to direct your preparation in certain directions, in the right directions, is to have a look at previous year's questions on art and culture which have figured in history optional question paper. So that would be a very good way to initiate a thought process. For example, in one of the previous years, in history optional, there was a question asked, discuss about the technological developments that took place during the time of Mughals, right? So such kind of question would have made you think on similar lines, what could have been the technological improvements that could have probably have happened under Delhi Sultans, right? It could have given you some fodder to think, some direction to think, instead of staring at the question of such types for the first time in your examination. So taking cues out of history optional questions of just from art and culture, it's not going to take much of time. You only need to take a question bank and simply look at a question. Just one glance at a question will trigger thoughts, and that thought triggering will take you to the right browsing habits. You will start exploring the right information. So that much of exposure is sufficient to being better than the rest in terms of attempting these questions in your mains. You don't need to do any special reading or anything from very unique books, because you are, after all, a general studies student. So it's not of any significance. It's not commonsensical. to read a totally new book simply to prepare for one particular question. But these are the ways how you can actually prepare yourself in a very short span, in a very effective method to handle that one question also with a lot of ease, right? So the first idea is brainstorm art and culture questions from history optional question bank, number one. Second is, whenever you read about architecture, sculpture, right, such kind of depictions on stone, on monuments, when you read about them, all the terms that you come across does not make any sense until you visualize them, until you see them in the form of some pictographic representation, right? So simply reading about Mahabalipuram, simply reading about Arjuna's penance, reading about the 7 pagodas, it is so useless. And that is why I don't really like Nitin Singania. It's because the depictions really do not make sense. It's simply terminologies after terminologies without giving a sense of student. See, the best way to experience these artistic developments is to simply visit the place. You need to go see touch the stone and see the nature of sculpture work that has taken place. But you don't have the time to do all that. So that's why at least make use of internet for that purpose, right? When you visualize something, when you're able to see something clearly, that is how you're able to appreciate art and culture for a longer period of time. So one way how I would actually ask you to do that is, let's say you read about a particular type of temple, right? And there are so many people, travel bloggers, who would have visited all these temples. So you have to simply search about the temple travelblogs.com, right? Simply try to read some 2 or 3 travel blogs. I'm sure that person, since he had visited that temple, he would have had some guide over there, or he would have interacted with people there. He would have got some specific information about the temple, which he would have brought it in the blog, right? So that's definitely a very, very easy, interesting way of visualizing all these sculptures and monuments as a tourist without visiting these places, right? Just one glance at all these monuments will introduce you to the peculiarities of all the sculptures and artistic developments which are there in that particular monument. So this is how memory remains for a longer period of time. All right. So I'll even give you a website which I'm really fond of, which is called as Google Arts and Culture, right? So you can see on the screen here. So this Google Arts and Culture, it's very, very interesting. It's a Google initiative basically to capture 360-degree images of all important artistic sites in India, right? So using that can also give you a sense of the interlinkages between religion, interlinkages between mythology, iconography, imagery that you find in all these monuments. For example, go to Mahabalipuram, you have this Arjuna's penance, right? You need to actually know what are the different images that you find in that rock. You find Shiva, you find different devatas, you find a water serpent over there, you find a strange looking cat, right? You find 3 headless torsos, 3 headless bodies which are sitting in a meditative pose, and a very famished body of Arjuna praying, right? You need to actually have a clear sense of the entire context and the meaning behind that particular sculpture, right? So that is, who knows, probably next year or maybe in the years down the line, a question can be asked that why is Mahabharata used as a popular representative iconography in various Indian monuments, in various Indian sculptures? Mahabharata's scenes are depicted. Explain why, right? So that can be asked as a question, because UPSC has asked a question on bull and lion motifs which are used in different art and architectural forms. So these are giving you some directions to further think, right? So you need to prepare for that. And how do you prepare for that? In an interesting manner. And how can you prepare in an interesting manner? When you visualize, when you see things before your eyes, right? And so using internet is something that you should be doing so as to appreciate art and culture. And third important point is, as you have already seen, the question on Delhi Sultanate, technological developments, as well as the question on post-Guptan period, what has been the reasons for decline of numismatic quality. All these are related to the economic and trade history. It's not simply just about culture, painting, literature, music, all to be viewed in isolation. That's definitely not a way to read art and culture. So that's why focus on this economy and trade aspects, and how has that influenced art and culture. For example, I can give you a point to think. After during the last phase of Delhi Sultanate, during the time of Lodhis, you find the coinage the numismatics, the coinage is of very inferior quality. Right? You find a lot of adulteration happening. The quality of silver coin, the silver tanka, has actually fallen down substantially. Right? Why has it happened? It's actually related to trade and commerce. Okay? It is actually related to the absence of a strong political control. So find out the link between all these two. If you're able to get answers for this, you are actually preparing yourself to face questions like the fifth question, the difficult question that was asked. Right? So it's not a child's play. It's not something that you can take things for granted. You cannot assume that you will simply read it and you'll go and you'll be able to manage all the questions. No, that's not how it works. That's why aspirants end up wasting attempts. They end up wasting 2, 3, 4 attempts, and it's only in the fourth attempt they realize the seriousness of how targeted and specific the preparation has to be. So that's why you don't have to really waste 3, 4 attempts. Simply learn it from all these kind of lectures as to the importance that should be given to such dedicated preparation, to such dedicated methods of how you can approach art and culture. The next advice I would like to give you is learn some English when it comes to art and culture. The reason is there will be occasions when you may not be able to take your answer forward for want of content, but still you'll be able to manage writing a decent answer if you know how to play with emotional expressions. Because these are cultural monuments. When you look at them, there's a sense of an emotional tickling that happens inside you, right? Say, for example, you go to Mahabalipuram and you look at this huge structure of Arjuna's penance carved out on a stone, right? When you look at it, what kind of labels will you use probably to capture your experience? So when you look at Arjuna's penance, you can feel a sense of a drama being played out, right? You have all those kind of characters depicted on a stone, all having some kind of an interaction with each other, right? There is a sense of dramatic expression, right? So this itself can be used in your answer. There is a great conveying of dramatic expression that one encounters when they look at Arjuna's penance, right? So knowing these kind of terms, jargons and expressions to be used really has a great role in art and culture to fill in the gaps, right? Despite your preparation, you may not be really able to know the exact points. Okay, if I were to ask you, give me 5 features of a mosque, you may really not know all the 5 features of a mosque. After all, you may know about the dome, you may know about the minar, but what beyond that? But definitely when you can visualize about a mosque, you can feel that it gives a sense of sublimity, right? Unless the detailing that you find in Indian temples, there's a sense of sublimity that you find in Indian mosques generally, right? There's a sense of airiness and roominess, right? So these are the jargons, these are the expressions that you can actually use to play your to play with the words so as to fill in content, right? So these are all some aspects of skills that you actually need to crack mains. Mains is not simply about pouring the content on a piece of paper, but it's in presenting, it's in giving a sense of satisfaction when the person who's reading your answer, when he goes through your answer, it is this human touch when you give to your answer, right? So all these kind of expressions that capture an experience of presenting a artistic or a cultural masterpiece before a reader, these expressions will do a very fine job, right? So learn how to use such kind of expressions, and for that Nitin Singania is useless, right? That is where you need to read from NCERTs, the kind of mood that is conveyed through good textbooks, right? So learn such expressiveness. So that is definitely one such way of how you can embellish your art and culture answer. Okay, so I'm not saying this itself is going to do your work. That's why I have put it as your 4th point, right? So this is a point that is something to be kept in mind as an addition to all the other 3 ideas that I have already told you before, right? And lastly, a mains test series. Because the mains test series, the questions that are set will definitely toe on the same lines as that of the previous year's questions asked by UPSC. So definitely there's a lot of thought that goes into framing such questions, which will definitely trigger thoughts. And there are so many occasions where the questions asked in mains test series will simply repeat in your mains as well. So definitely mains test series is definitely one important way of how you can plug your gaps in preparation, right? So these are some of the points. These are the 5 different ways how your preparation strategy can be followed so as to even face the difficult questions from art and culture, right? So understand that Prelims questions like the ones that you can find here, these are complete facts, and these are questions of 2022 prelims, right? So three names of three historical persons and what were they? It's given on as a question. And then in question number 6, you find which of the following above are Jain texts. It's very, very difficult to make blind guesses for these kind of questions. And that's why I say art and culture questions in prelims will really be very challenging. Even history optional students will find it very, very difficult to handle such kind of questions. So you need to have a great factual competency in handling prelims questions. But when it comes to handling mains questions, this amount of factual memory is not needed. But knowing direction in which your preparation should be taken is what is more important when it comes to handling mains questions. So I believe, again, these 5 points, if you can understand the nature of questions asked in mains, I'm sure you'll be able to benefit out of this 5 points that I have told you as to how to keep yourself equipped for the next year's mains preparation for art and culture.